I've been dealing with this negotiation, and I have to tell you, I don't very often do this, but I don't think you should marry this person. I would come in, it was like an entire operation. I mean, I'd come in sometimes, there'd be bags of money on the table. It was like, it was pressure cooker, right? And I would come in just to quickly do the civil divorce.
Right.
Cases where they've thrown him in jail, and the guy's sitting in jail. I mean, there's a guy here from Muncie, that wasn't paying child support either, right? Did you spend money on an affair? Did you spend money on gambling? I literally stepped out to take a phone call. While I stepped out, they shoved the document in front of my client and made her sign. She didn't know any better. I hate to say it. They have a lot of the judges in their pocket.
And what advice do you have for people who have blended families?
The struggle is real.
Yeah,
right?
the struggle is
The struggle is real. And for the guts to stand up in a crowd full of people and say that Das Torah says this. But you know what? Good luck trying to find Rabbanim that you and I know to stand up and say something and speak out against it.
Right. What message do you have to people who are afraid that an avalanche of abuse is going to come down, but they're contemplating divorce? How should they gather some courage and decide, you know what, enough is enough? Okay, we have over here a wonderful guest. His name is Danny Yaniv. He's a divorce attorney right here in Rockland County. I want to thank you for coming.
Sure.
And welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Let's jump right into it. What drew you to this profession that you're in right now?
So the profession itself was really, I think, my entire life, everyone said to me is like, you argue a lot. And you like to argue and you like to talk. So I think naturally everyone said, you should be a lawyer, you should be a lawyer. And I think, after hearing it for most of my childhood and, my parents kind of pushed me into it. I decided that's what I was going to do. And I didn't really have any other ambitions. So I went to law school. So
how old were you when you went to law school?
I think I started my law school career at 22 or 23, if I recall, and it's essentially a 3-year program. Okay. I graduated when I was probably about 26, and right around that time, I think I was looking for a job that was more local, and so the only thing that was really available was a firm here in Rockland County. It was a relatively big firm. And for matrimonial, and I kind of fell into that. I think in law school, I thought I would wind up in some sort of real estate related field, but I got into the divorce business essentially with the practice that was primarily a high-end litigation law firm. And then I think a year into it, it was so contentious and it was very just, I guess, a high conflict experience. And I think I didn't like it initially. So I left for a little bit, and then, a year or two later, I think the economy came crashing down, and I decided I was just going to start my own practice. And what I initially started out with was just this concept of uncontested divorce. At the time, it was like around where Amazon was blowing up, and I thought that everybody was switching to more of an online presence, and things were people were transacting online. And I said, why don't we try and see if we can make divorce transactional? People that can agree on the terms of the divorce, make it simple, make it affordable. And so I kind of started my career offering an online uncontested divorce.
How did that work?
Well, it would, I don't know if people realize this, but I would say about 90% of divorce, especially in New York State, is uncontested. And what that means is that you have couples who know they want to get a divorce. Most people, I think we live in a bubble, perhaps here in Rockland County, but most people outside of New York, the New York City and outside of in the urban areas, they can't afford, to spend $25,000 on an attorney for a retainer, and so they may not have enough money to even fight over. So what they typically will do is say, hey, we can proceed on an uncontested divorce, which basically is, we'll agree on the terms, we agree who gets custody of the kids, we agree on how to divide up the finances.
This all happens in your office?
Well. So kind of taking a step back, when I started my practice, the idea was to make this transactional where they would come online and they would complete some information, and an attorney would then discuss it with them, kind of give them some guidance, and then we would draft up all the documents. But this was, a fixed fee where they essentially agreed on all the terms. So they knew how much they wanted, to what the agreement was regarding child support, regarding how they wanted to divide up. Most of these people didn't have a house or didn't have any major assets. So it was really just nuts and bolts.
Is it some sort of mediation, right?
It wasn't mediation. It's literally people coming and saying, hey, we want to get a divorce. We don't have a whole lot. Here's what we do have, and here's how we'd like to divide it up. And here's what we've agreed to. Mom or dad will have primary custody of the kids. And from there, we would just draft up the documents. So we were essentially just a drafting service. And we were able to process divorces. And I think that's how I started my career, simply because it didn't exist at the time. There was really no such thing as an online divorce besides for these kind of do-it-yourself services where they would send you the paperwork. So we actually offered an uncontested divorce at a fixed fee. Now, years later, I still do that. I actually have that as a separate side of my business, which is kind of automated.
And it's still working.
It still works for a vast majority of people.
But unfortunately, not here.
Well, so I'm going to get to that. So my business kind of evolved, and after, I guess, years of doing this, at one point I was filing more divorces in New York State than any other law firm in the state of New York. Yeah, with the uncontested divorce, because it was a unique thing, and we created this platform where people could come on and really seamlessly start a divorce process. A lot of it was automated. We used a lot of technology to kind of speed up the process, automate the document assembly, all that, the filings, and all that. So that platform was actually pretty successful early on, and then all of a sudden there was like a lot of copycats. People came into the business, people started doing it. But what I did realize is that about 20% of my cases were becoming contested, because at the end of the day, people may start the divorce thinking they could do this amicably, and then when push comes to shove, things don't quite work out that well, and they have issues arise, one party's not agreeing, and next thing you know, they're in conflict. So initially I wasn't really taking those cases, but then I realized that was a huge part of my business. And so over the last 10 years, we ramped up and we became a full litigation law firm. And we do with high end. I mean, we have clients worth, $100 million, and we have clients worth, $100,000. And it really doesn't make a difference. That the divorce itself is really the same for everybody. You may have more complex issues. You may have businesses to deal with. You may have complex custody cases, but what takes place in a divorce really is the same, across the board. It doesn't make a difference if you're in the Frum community or if you're in the non-Jewish community. Most of my clients are not Jewish, but in Rockland County, we do live in a bit of, like I said, a bubble, because the issues that the Frum community deals with are typically very different than what the non-Jewish community will deal with. And there's a lot of it really comes down to very specific issues that you see recurring. But eventually my practice, evolved into a litigation law firm, and we still do. And part of it is we do a lot of prenuptial agreements. That's a big part of our business. In fact, we have a website. It's called getaprenup.com, right? Which is just focuses on prenups.
Prenups are only happening in the secular world, correct?
No. In the last... Well, I think it's a whole other topic, but I would say in the last 5 years, prenups blew up. I mean, I was watching, and essentially, as an attorney, you kind of have your finger on the pulse of what people are demanding and what people want. And so prenups became almost universal at this point. Now, there's a lot of different types of prenups. So in the Frum community, there's the Halachic prenup. There's different issues that we could talk about. But the concept of a prenup, it used to be more taboo. People used to look at it and frown and say, "Oh, that's not for me. It's not romantic."
Because it's just you going into the marriage or with an exit plan. Is that what it is?
That's what people think.
Yeah.
But
there is a different view on it, because if a woman would think, what about love? What about just let it go and we'll see what happens. I mean, there's something of a risk that that you jump in.
It seems like it's not romantic, right?
Yeah.
I would argue it's just the opposite. I would argue that what it does is it's kind of it's a conversation that you have to have with your fiance, right?
An intelligent conversation.
It's an intelligent conversation. It's a mature conversation. It says, look, if we go through a divorce, I don't want to be in a battle with you, right? I don't want to be in a
not now and not ever.
Not ever, right? But everyone's in love when they're preparing their prenup. One of the things, I mean, for the most part, I mean, I've seen some relationships completely fall apart during the prenup negotiation process.
Like,
A lot. Yeah, that happens, believe it or not, because you kind of see people's true colors. You see if people are greedy, how they feel about the relationship. Is this just about money? What
So
exactly?
it is a good thing because stuff come
It
out.
is.
It is an amazing thing because people start seeing,
See red flags.
yeah,
100%.
which you didn't see through the whole dating process.
You may not have, because the dating process, and again, we've all gone through it. The dating process, you're kind of in la la land, right? It's your own love. Everything is
And
everything
everybody's on
is
their
roses.
best behavior.
Exactly. And I think that when you kind of get down to brass tacks, when people talk about money, you kind of get a sense of whether where their head's at, their personality, what's important to them, what their priorities are. But again, I would argue that the prenup really is a great way to avoid and to tell your fiance, look, I want to make sure that you're protected. I want to make sure that I provide for you, so you have an opportunity to say, hey, in the event we go through a divorce, here's what I'm going to provide for you, right? You kind of have transparency. You know what you're getting into, and we can avoid the battle, because the couples that have prenups, the vast majority of the time, are going to avoid the $200,000, $300,000 divorces you hear about, right? That people spend 3-4 years on. You're going to avoid that, because all of those issues would have been decided in advance, and the courts will generally follow whatever the terms of the parties contracted.
Now, the children in custody is also part of the prenup. This is before children,
right?
So this is not a discussion.
Now you can't. Yeah, you technically can't.
So then custody could blow up in your face, even though you have a prenup.
Right. So that is the case. That's true.
That's where you come in.
Well, look, I'm not going to say that a prenup is foolproof. So it will protect you to some extent. I mean, listen, I'll give you an example, right? A lot of people, this does not so much reflect the Frum community, but a lot of people, for example, in the non-Jewish community, they get married much later, right? So they're not getting married in their 20s.
Right.
You think about kids getting married 21, they think like, what do I have? What do I have to protect, right? And so you're not really thinking that far ahead. But let's say you're getting married and you're 30 years old, right? You built up a business, you have a successful business, you put a lot into it. People look at it and they're like, the chances of my marriage failing is 50% or more, right? In the Frum community, maybe not. It is a sad reflection of where we're at, but that's the truth, right? And so, do I want my business to be put under the magnifying glass? Do I want to have to drag all my private affairs to the court, in the event of a divorce? And so, a prenup does protect you, especially if you're more advanced in life and you have a career, you've built up some assets, you have what to protect. Sometimes people are in a second marriage, third marriage, they have children from other relationships, so a prenup is a really important tool that I advocate for, not just because it's a service that I'm selling, but because it gives you the transparency of knowing, here's the game plan of what happens in the event of divorce, and here's how we intend to interact with each other in the event of a divorce. Here's what I'm giving you. Here's what my expectations are. Here's what your expectations are, right? And you put everything out there on the table, and it unfortunately. It does happen, and in the event of a divorce, you look to that agreement, and for the most part, at least you can avoid that conflict.
And what you see is that the women who are mature about it, like let's say a 30-year-old that comes in and has what you just described, he has kids from previous marriage and this and that. Do you see that they are like, they understand they accept the process?
I can't speak for all of them. There are some women that are in it for the right reasons. And, look, nowadays it's not just the men that are making the money. You have a lot of situations where the women are coming in with a lot of money. I mean, I had one client and I was talking to her. She called for a prenup. And I kind of was dismissive of her because I didn't, the background she came from. And then I find out, for example, she has some sort of line of hair care products, right? And I'm thinking, all right, I thought, she's an entrepreneur, she's making it. Turns out her company's worth $75 million. I looked her up. I'm like, all right. Within 3-4 years, she built up this huge company. It was worth $75 million. And this was just last year.
And this is she that wanted the prenup.
She wanted the prenup. She was getting married to a guy. The guy himself was not too shabby. He's pretty successful. I mean, he wasn't making crazy amounts, but he was making close to $200,000 a year, right? He was self-sufficient. But she wanted a prenup. Now, turns out, she got divorced. He contacted us, I think not even 6 months later. This guy was cheating on her. It's not non-Jewish couple. The guy was cheating on her. I think I have to disclaimers. He was cheating on her, and she discovered it early on. She was obviously very kind of shook up just because it was so soon after the wedding. And luckily she had a prenup, and she avoided a huge catastrophe because her business was, she was, I think, in the process of selling this business, and it would have been a huge hit to her.
He would have been entitled to 50%, correct?
So there are rules of how it works in a divorce, right? So if the question is how do things get divided in divorce? So the short answer is that if you own something prior to the marriage, right, it's sort of protected, right? If you have something called,
to begin with, yeah.
If you own it, right, premarital. The problem is if you have a business, let's say, and you've built that business up over, a couple of years, you've invested in it. We call it, sweat equity during the marriage. The problem is that your spouse could be entitled to the equity that, the appreciation and value of that company. And the same thing applies to a lot of different things. So yes, in theory, if you had an account that you had and you kept it completely separate throughout the marriage, you're not going to have to share that. The problem is that you're commingling your assets. You're adding, you're buying things with it. It's impossible to trace back what's separate and what's not. So a prenup gives you those protections. Without a prenup, you're kind of susceptible to a court having to either, you have to prove what's separate and what's not, or it becomes marital just by default. So prenups do offer that protection. In a divorce, the courts, most of what we do as attorneys, really, I would say about 80% of the work that we do is the finances of it, the forensics of a divorce. And what that is figuring out what's marital, what's not. When a couple comes to me for a divorce, the first thing we say is we're going to have to start gathering your financial information. And we prepare something called a statement of net worth, which is kind of like a balance sheet. It has all the finances. And the idea is for us to get a financial picture of what you're worth, what your assets look like, what your income looks like, and what your debt looks like. And the same thing for the other side. And then we figure out how to equalize it. So that's really 80% of what we do. And we fight over these things. What's marital, what's not marital, whether you dissipated money. Did you spend money on an affair? Did you spend money on gambling? I mean, I deal with that a lot. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we were dealing with subpoenaing casinos because one of the guys was gambling, a significant amount. And so these are the types of things we deal with as attorneys, and our job is to sort through it. That's really what we do.
Yeah. Now, can you explain, since we're on the topic of the prenups, what is an halachic prenup? I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, and there's also, it's a huge issue in agunas, in with divorces, that there are men who don't want to give a get to the wives for money. It became like a piece of real estate now. It's like accepted that they want money for a get, and there's the other way around too. Sometimes the wife doesn't want to take a get. So you're a little bit familiar with halachic prenups?
Sure. Well, I think the halachic prenup evolved. I'm not 100% sure. I think it was the RCA that initially put that out. And the halachic prenup evolved because of a problem that we were experiencing in the Frum community, and that was that men weren't willing to give a get, and it was becoming more and more of a leverage. It was being leveraged, or the get was being leveraged to get whatever it is they want. I mean, in some cases, men felt that they were being treated badly. They weren't given access to their kids. They were being excluded from the marital residence. I mean, they arguably, a lot of men had legitimate reasons to be upset because of how.
But is this a tool that you feel that a person can use? So because the only reason why they have the power of not giving a get is because the Torah gave them the power.
Right.
So what you're using is the Torah
as a weapon, basically.
As a weapon. So so let's say if he has, he's saying that the woman is not right. She's alienating him from the kids and stuff like that. But is that a reason enough to say, you know what, just because I'm born on this side and the Torah gave me the right, I'm going to fix you?
No, I 100%. Look, I always start our conversations whether I'm representing the husband or the wife in the Frum community. I don't think that men should use the get as leverage, and I don't think women should use children as leverage. I think everyone uses, in the context of a high conflict situation, naturally everyone's going to use what they have at their disposal.
They also bring out the worst in each other,
sure. Right? And I think that men, if they feel that the world's against them, they have nothing else, they have no control over the situation, they're going to use the get because that's all they have, right? And that's their leverage. And women will use the children because historically and statistically, the courts would typically give custody to the women, and there was almost a default that it was expected that the mom
Take care of the kids.
would get the kids and would have control over the kids.
Yeah.
So yes, it was used. The Halachic prenup, as a result of, as a consequence of that, the Halachic prenup was kind of like an innovation that basically all it is an agreement that says that you sign prior to your marriage, and it says that in the event that one party seeks a divorce, right, and the other party refuses, there's a civil penalty, right? Because the problem is how do you enforce a get? A get is, there's a separation of church and state, which means that the law can't
have zero to do with the get.
Right.
Yeah.
They can't entertain, halachic issues.
Right.
So how do you deal with that and counter that? So, there's a lot of things that New York State has come up with. There's get laws, things like that, and I'll explain that if you want later.
Yeah.
But the Halachic prenup really just says, if you don't give me the get, then I can impose or I can enforce civil penalties on you where you have to pay a fine, a monetary fine. It could be, I've seen it, $150, $250 a day for every day that you're not giving
the get.
And the idea is if you put enough financial pressure on the guy,
things will happen.
Right. Now, the problem is in the Frum community, you don't really, in the Hamish community, you don't really see people signing these agreements. That's the problem.
That's one. But halachic, is it a forced get? Or if you sign it from before, at that point you believe that this is a good idea. So where's the halacha? Now
you have to ask that. You're gonna have to ask a rabbi.
A rabbi, right?
And
which rabbis are with this? And
listen, the RCA is affiliated with YU, and they're and oftentimes not oddly, but ironically, the people that are likely to sign halachic prenup are typically not the ones that are not going to give a get, right?
Stable.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've dealt with, oftentimes when I prepare a prenup for someone in the Frum community, it'll be suggested either by me or the other attorney that they sign a halachic prenup, and I've gotten a lot of resistance. Like, I'm not signing that. That's like, why would I sign that? And even the women don't expect that it be signed. But I mean, I would tell you this: if I was marrying off my daughter tomorrow, I would want that, and not because I think anything bad. It's just why would you want to put your daughter through what I see other people going through? And I've dealt with some of the most notorious guys, notorious get refusers in the community, and these are people who are. I think you mentioned about narcissism. I mean, these are people with real narcissistic personalities, to the point where they can't even see that there's something wrong with this picture here.
Correct.
And it doesn't make a difference how much humiliation or pressure the world could be coming down on them. They don't care.
They just have no introspect.
They
see themselves. That's all they see.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the issue is that, oftentimes the people that are what we call the get refusers, it comes with psychological issues. These are not usually your very sane people.
Right.
I mean, I've seen a lot of cases where the legal system bears down on them through a lot of remedies that we have. I mean, they can impose crazy support obligation. There are judges in Brooklyn and in Rockland County that have taken steps to actively combat that.
Yeah.
And the only thing they can do within the confines of the law is really just can't force a guy to give a get, right? But they can impose severe, penalties like heavy support, things like that. Problem is if a guy is penniless, he's
penniless, or he has no business.
And I've seen cases where they've thrown him in jail. And the guy's sitting in jail. I mean, there's a guy here from Muncie,
on what basis
was thrown in jail. He wasn't paying child support either, right? They gave him they hit him up with all these support obligations, didn't pay it. They got him. The judge was already looking for a reason
to put him in.
But clearly, again, we're dealing with someone who's not mentally well.
Right.
So I think he sat through his 6 months in jail. They let him out. I mean, there was nothing.
And
still hasn't given a get. Still hasn't given a get. It's not. And it's at some point, it's not really about the get. It's just it's about them. They're not. They're not going to give a get under any circumstance. And so
those are
it's a lost battle.
Hard stories.
Yeah.
And that's so true. The prenups is just, even if it's for a red flag, it is good. When you sit at the table and that person is like, no.
100%.
For the red flag itself.
If you're sitting at the table and the guy, the first instinct is, I'm not signing that, right?
Yeah.
That tells you a lot.
Then you read his mind. Like, what is going on in your mind?
You always have to look at it as if your daughter was getting married to this guy, and as a father, right? And
Right.
again, I have a daughter. You have a daughter, maybe
Right.
that she's older,
Yeah.
right? You know, I
Yeah.
met her a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
and my daughter is 7 years old. I look at it as like, what steps would you take to protect your daughter from going through that nightmare?
Nice.
And it's a simple, and again, this is not. I don't look at this as not some draconian, punishment. This is a very simple thing. It says, hey, I want my freedom. You can't keep me locked up. And I'm not. This doesn't suggest. It doesn't make marriage, very kind of frivolous. Like, you just
Right.
get out of a marriage. And I
Right.
agree. There are people that argue, well, what does this mean if people just want to get out of a marriage? And I agree. I think that there are some people that look to get out of a marriage too quickly and don't try. Nowadays there's not like an effort to try and
Make it work and
make
stuff
it work,
like that.
right? And I think that if there's abuse, that's a different story.
Right.
That's the first thing I say. If there's abuse, there's really physical abuse,
Physical or mental
emotional abuse, right?
Yeah.
Get out of the marriage, right? But oftentimes it's not that. Oftentimes it's issues that can be resolved, and those types of things. I do believe, and I've been there with clients, and I've said, hey, I don't see so much daylight between you guys. Maybe you guys want to take a step back and work on this marriage before you come to my office, because I don't really see why you've gotten to this level, or why and we're not talking about high conflict cases. We're talking about cases where people just decided, and it seems to you that
So sometimes you make shalom bayis also.
sometimes,
Wow.
yeah. I've been there with couples who are so nice to each other during like the consultation.
Yeah.
And I would, I'd be like, hey, you sure you guys want to get a divorce?
You sure you can't make it work?
Right. Sometimes I feel like, and we've had plenty of people in the middle of the process, they've decided they wanted to reconcile. That's a nice thing,
Right.
You can if you could figure out like, hey, you know what, maybe we want to take a step back and try and rethink this.
Yeah. And where does spirituality come in? So let's say if a person, if two people are together and they, they have a strong belief system, everything is meant to be, and Hashem and this and that. You see that in between the Frum world, like when it comes to divorces?
I would love to say that I see spirituality when it comes to these divorces, but
it's.
I mean, I've done divorces for rebbeim and people who are, chashuva people in the community, and people who are, I mean, when there was a point in my career early on that I would work with a local bezin here, Hasidic bezin, and they would basically have me on speed dial for like these crazy, cases. It would have to sometimes come in the middle of the night because it was a pressure cooker, and they finally got the get right.
Now, or like Friday before this month.
It was always at some crazy time at night, and I get a call. I'm not going to mention the rabbi's name. I don't think he's in this business anymore, but he used to do volume like in the Hasidic community. He was the go-to guy to come to, right? And he would come. I would come in. It was like an entire operation. I mean, I'd come in sometimes to be bags of money on the table. It was like it was pressure cooker, right? And I would come in just to quickly do the civil divorce, and because we had
this was part of the settlement.
It was part of what I did. And I would just come in and and I literally had almost nothing to do with the negotiations. I would just come in and they would give me all the terms, and my job was to draft everything up, make sure everyone signed, and just get out. And this is early in my career, and like this guy, this Rav was giving me a lot of business, and I would come into this. The problem with this is that it was kind of a scam, right? And I have to be real about this, and it was kind of a scam. He would pressure both sides. He would go from room to room. You may say it was brilliant, but I saw it for what it was.
He was twisting arms on both sides.
Exactly, but oftentimes in the name of just getting the get, he would make all sorts of promises. Yeah, don't worry about this. Don't worry about it. What would happen is a couple of weeks after this, it hit the fan, right? Everything was just started falling apart. Everything that the rabbi
the visitation and the custody and the
nothing was working out.
Nothing was working.
And they would be back in court, right? And oftentimes in the Hasidic community, a lot of the gittin that I did were people that you had, one of them was going off the derech, and one of them wanted to be Hasidic, right? It could have been the mom, it could have been the all walks. I can tell you stories. Some of them are people that are very famous now in the world because they've gone out and they're now part of like culture.
The public,
One of these divorces, similar that I handled also in the same vein, went out and there's a Netflix special about it, right?
Okay.
So all of these people had unique backgrounds, and oftentimes these are people who, one of them was in a different spiritual place, if you will, than the other, right? And one person wanted to go completely off secular, one didn't, and in the Frum community, when one party wants to leave the Frum world, they go after them hard, right? The entire community bears down on them, and it's very hard to fight the system. And so oftentimes, the party that wants to leave, whether it's the husband or the wife, they are subject to a lot of I mean, it's a nightmare for them, and
Yeah.
they will have an uphill battle. They lose custody of their kids. They lose rights to
And
to
they
their
lose it
kids.
through court, like
Well,
sometime.
it could start in Beis Din and then evolve into court,
How does the
and then the
judge look
court.
at this when it comes to the different levels of religion?
So, one of the things that the courts will typically do is they look at the lifestyle that the kid was growing up in, and
Mhm.
so most of these judges are not religious. A lot of
Right,
Jewish judges,
right,
they're not religious. Some of them aren't even Jewish, right?
right.
But their job is to look at the lifestyle that the kids grew up in. So if the
Thus
kids
far,
grew up Hasidish and they grew up in, let's say, in New Square, right?
right.
Um, they're for the most part, and New Square has a machinery behind them. They will spend a lot of money to
To
keep the kids and
protect,
protect
right,
the kids
right,
and all that, and they
right.
will exile the other parent, right?
Correct.
Um, so if you're going up against them, and they also, I hate to say it, they have a lot of the judges in their pocket because when these judges come up for
There's
re-election,
black votes and
they have
there's a
black
lot of
votes. So the
connections.
judges
Yeah,
are very
yeah,
mindful. They're not going to cross.
yeah.
So they know what the community pressure is, right? And so what ends up happening is that these people have an uphill battle, and very often, if let's say it's the father that is remaining Hasidish and the mother's going out,
Right.
mother's going to have very limited access, right? And if she's not Shomer Shabbos, things like that, it's
It's going to
she's
get
not going
less and less.
right. And so the courts are going to be, for the most part, they're going to maintain what the lifestyle the kids were, and they're going to maintain them in the yeshivas, things like that. Now, if both parents go off the derech, then all right,
That's a
you know, have a
different
problem, and you
story.
have
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
They're not much of an issue there, but it is a common issue. It is a common problem in these in the Hasidic world. I see that a lot. Like we have a couple getting divorced, one wants to remain Hasidic, and the other wants to go off.
What do you think happens to these kids? Are they? You see, my question is: because I spoke to a counselor who
Yeah.
was doing, blended families and second marriages and stuff like that, and he was telling me that you're not winning the game. Let's say if you try to hold the kids where you are, if you're more Hasidic and or whoever wins, they still have access to the parents, and the parents one side, one parent is going to
Right.
expose them to certain things. So,
It's a big problem.
what do you see at the end of the result? Is winning? Are you winning the battle? Are you winning the war? What's going
So
on?
it's funny because I was in court today, and we're kind of wrapping up a divorce that took 2 years, and this is a speech that I've heard many times, but it's very true, and that is in the world of divorce, there it really is no winning, right?
Correct.
Nobody wins, right? The best you can expect
Yeah.
is to be somewhat just satisfied and survive, right? Because everyone's giving up something in a divorce. There's just no such thing. Very rarely is there a win. I mean, and it does happen, but very, very rare.
Right.
In a divorce, your family's taking a hit. Financially, you're taking two households, they're being torn apart.
Yeah.
If you were struggling before, you're going to be struggling now because you're now,
Right.
you now have to support two households, right? Your kids are going to get hit the hardest.
They
right?
get affected the most.
They
I
get
think
affected
between
100%.
all of it, they're the ones who get affected the most.
Correct. So when you ask me, the question is like, I have seen some families when they get a divorce where there is a healthy relationship between the parents, and that's where the kids do well.
Correct.
And which is why an uncontested divorce, if it can happen, is the best thing for them, because you put the kids through, a year or two of torture through the courts. Oftentimes, one of the things that happens in a divorce when custody is an issue is they have to appoint an attorney for the children. That attorney is interacting with the kids, so they're seeing conflict. Then they have to get forensics, and they have to get psychiatrists in there and all sorts of people. And the kids become pawns in this process, and they see the hostility. And it's the worst thing you could do for the kids is put your kids through 2 years of a divorce proceeding where they see mom and dad,
The
just
animosity, the hate.
animosity and the venom going there, and they are at the center of all this. So they end up you start seeing drug use, you start seeing problems in school, you start seeing all sorts of behavioral issues. That's the one thing I see day in, day on, and it's almost always when the parents can't come to kind of a civil terms on how to end the marriage, right? If they're going to be going at it, their kids are going to suffer. So, again, the concept of spirituality is very hard for me as an attorney to see in divorce.
Right.
You're seeing people at their worst,
Right.
right? You're really
Right.
seeing people at their worst.
I'm sure they're worst.
Yeah.
But let me ask you a funny question. We as from Yidden, we're not supposed to go to court.
Right.
Where's it says we have to go to the Din Torah first. What if a Frum couple, comes to you and says, "We want to go to court. I'm going to cut out the whole Din Torah thing."
Right.
What do you do?
Here's the deal, okay? Every divorce has to go through court at some point. If you're asking me whether you want to have a case adjudicated, right, decided by a Beis in advance, right? So, I mean, the answer to that is that I've yet to find a Beis that will really do a good job and give a fair shake. And again, it really also depends on who's coming in, who I'm representing. So, if a couple comes in and I'm representing the wife, right? So here's what I do know. If you go to Beis, most of the local Beis, right? And I'm talking about the Hamish Beis, and we could talk about, let's say, the RCA a little differently because they're more professionally run. And there are some Beis that are professionally run where they have more of a legal side to them. But if you're a woman in the Hamish community and you're coming to a Beis, I can tell you a few things. You're going to get custody of the kids almost always, unless you're going off the derech, right? But financially, you're not going to do well. The concept of support exists, but it's only support for the kids. There's no such concept of support. There really isn't a concept of what we call equitable distribution, where you're entitled to part of the finances.
Because according to halacha, you're just entitled for the ksuba, right?
You get the ksuba, and it's nothing, right? So you're gonna get. I mean, the Hasidim literally have it like broken down to like, if it's a rich couple, if it's a poor couple, they're maybe gonna get, I don't know, $50 per kid per week, and if it's a rich couple, it'd be like, I don't know, $200 per kid per week. They have a formula for how they do things. It's not doesn't necessarily grounded. I don't know if it's halacha or not. And again, I'm not a rabbi, so I want to put a disclaimer out there. I can't speak for halacha. But you're gonna come, you're gonna get your towing and all that. At the end of the day, unless you're going to, let's say, like I said, the RCA, who runs things very professionally, and they also look to apply common law, you're not really going to get a fair shake as you're not going to get a fair shake as a woman. So oftentimes men are going to want to go to Beis. Now, oftentimes I also find that Beis is corrupt. You don't know, who they know, who they're connected with. It's very hard to really tell. I want to feel that I want to say that there are, again, that there's a lot of very credible Rabbanim out there who I trust. Again, I'm not going to mention names across the board here, just because But I will say that I've been to Beis cases where, like, I'll give you one example. This is a case in Brooklyn. It was a Beis. I literally stepped out to take a phone call. While I stepped out, they shoved the document in front of my client and made her sign. She didn't know any better. Made her sign. It was an arbitration. Now, I would never have had her sign that agreement. They had her. It was essentially an arbitration provision where she was locked into to binding arbitration, and they snuck it. While I literally went in for 2 minutes to take a phone call. They snuck it, had her sign it.
They knew it. They knew that you were standing there and watching.
They knew that,
like a hawk.
Well, so just to give you an idea of the low coverage, and then I didn't know about it until we went through Beis and we said, listen, I'm not. I came there just to do this as a mediation, and I said, this is not going to work out. I left it, and then a couple of weeks later, they tried to enter a decision with an arbitration. I said, where did this come from? Anyway, I had to make a motion to get the whole thing set aside. But the idea is there's corruption out there. There's a lot of shenanigans, and your shake as a woman is not going to be. You're not going to have a great shake at getting what you're entitled to. So it's very hard for me to recommend if someone's coming in. How do I recommend Beis? Even though I understand that halachically that's what you're supposed to do. In today's day and age, it's not going to cut it. If they're coming from a wealthy family and they're used to a certain lifestyle, they're going to get very little.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know how to get around that. Tell me some ideas.
I hear what you're saying. I want to start from the beginning. So let's say there is a couple or two people who live together for a while, and things start shaking. So stuff is they're starting to have some kind of problems.
Right.
So in the Frum community, or tell me how it is in the other communities that you know. The first thing is you go to your local rabbi. They have an issue, and the parents tell them, go to the rabbi from your shul, whatever, your local rabbi. I'm like, I got to tell you, there's a story. I don't know if you heard it this weekend, but there was a Hamish guy from Borough Park, 55 years old, who committed suicide. Did you hear the story?
Is this a couple of weeks ago?
No, just now.
Just this week?
Yeah, it was in here in Bear Mountain Bridge.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah,
no.
He just jumped right over the bridge. Terrible story.
What's the backstory?
The backstory is a divorce, some kind of divorce or separation. I don't know what happened, but what's funny is, why I'm saying this is that he sent out messages to everybody, to his wife, to his mother, to his father, to his kids. is heartbreaking. Heartbreaking just to read the couple of words that he's writing. But one thing that I almost fell off the chair is that there was a rabbi, which I'm not going to say a name, in Borough Park, that he was like saying, "Job well done. You had a serious influence on my kids." He was like the rabbi who was telling the kids to alienate the father. So he was writing it out. He was saying, for you to let my kids ignore me and treat me like I don't exist, and job well done, he was saying. Just to read that. Now, I don't know.
This rabbi, I mean, again, obviously I don't know the
yeah,
backstory, but
right.
I'm sure this rabbi has a lot on his conscience right now. It's terrible.
Or he
clearly we were dealing with
he
someone
calls
that
it
had
a mental illness.
Yeah,
So
clearly he
it's
had a
funny that he wrote in one of his posts that this is not a mental illness. This is something much deeper, much darker. I tried, and I made a lot of mistakes in my life. So he's telling his father that he didn't live up to his expectations, and he's telling his wife, "You're the love of my life, and I'm sorry I couldn't be your partner." It's like heartbreaking stuff.
It's obviously deep-rooted issues.
There's deeper stuff over there, and he tells the little kid, "I know you needed a father, and I wanted to be there, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be there." Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But to write out a name of a rabbi, famous rabbi, and everybody knows him in Brooklyn, and has a big following, to like tell you see, to me it was important for him to in public write that this rabbi had such an influence on his kids or whatever the case is. So I'm looking at it. These rabbis, they're not professionals.
They're not.
You come to the shul because you daven there, takes your side. He makes a decision like he would do in his own house with his own daughter. And you're not moving it over to professionals, or you're not. I mean,
so I, listen. I just want to say in that vein, years ago when I was very young, I went through a divorce. Right.
Yeah, okay.
Getting personal here, I guess.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I went through a divorce, and I'm only bringing this story up because
who was your attorney?
You know what? I think I was in the middle of law school at the time. It was a very friendly divorce between me and my ex. It was very friendly. I had a son. He was, at the time, he was 3 years old. We agreed that we were going to share him 50-50, and we did. There was really very little to fight. I didn't have money at the time.
There was nothing to fight about.
There was nothing to fight about, and we agreed on, and I basically prepared an uncontested divorce, and I did it myself, and that was that. And
amazing stuff.
For the most part, my ex and I, we got along through the years, and I would like to say that as a result of that, our son, who's now 21,
I know him.
Okay, all right. So he's very well adjusted. He did very, very well, and he's an amazing kid, an amazing kid. And I'm not taking credit for him.
It's something to be proud of.
It is.
You and your ex.
Me, my ex, my current wife. It takes a village, as they say, right? Funny, at my son's bar mitzvah, he said, that was his speech. He said, "It takes a village." And yes, having. And I'm not slapping myself on the back and saying, job well done. I'm just saying it takes a lot to try and keep it. And I'm not saying there wasn't some bumps along the road.
Right.
But if you can, your kids will be better for it. The reason I'm saying this is when I went to my father is a very, very, very firm man, and he follows halacha, and he always says, "What does Das Torah say?" Right? So when I was going through the divorce, he took me to some Rav here in Muncie. Like I said, it was a big guy. And I remember having a conversation. I never met this Rav before. He's sitting there, and I think I was interrupting him in the middle of his learning. And he said to me, he said, he's like, "Tell me about the situation." So I told him, I said, "My question is, I really would like to have my son 50% of the time. I feel like I'm very connected with him. I felt like the relationship was really important to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just be, this weekend father who saw the kids every other week,
right.
like was a lot of the cases that I was dealing with, right?" And he said to me, he's like, "No." He's like, "You need to make sure that you make time eating for Torah. You have to make sure that you prenuptial, this and that, and you find yourself another zivug.
They take care of yourself also, like self-care."
But that's how but this is what he's telling me. He was telling me essentially that I shouldn't take my son 50% of the time. He said I should have my son every other Shabbos.
Wow.
And I said, but I'm very close with my son, and I said I feel like A, he's gonna miss out, and B, like I feel like the relationship is going to be different because of that. I said, he's like, "No." He's like, 100%, only every other Shabbos, he told me. And I walked out, and I was very turned off from the whole experience.
Because it's not what you want. It's not what you got. You didn't feel it.
Yeah, this guy didn't know me. I mean, he just knew me for 5 minutes, and he's dictating
telling
how
your relationship with your child is.
So the realization I had is that, Das Torah is good for certain things. And maybe there are some Rabbanim out there that have, they're very introspective and that have the insight that can really understand the human dynamic and all that. But if I would have listened to that Rav, I would have had my son the relationship I had, and maybe my son would not have grown up. And one of the things that at the time that I had an aunt that was like more of like a philosopher, she wasn't religious, but she passed away recently, but she was my great aunt really. And she basically said to me, I did all the research for you. I looked up, she said, and the statistics show that when a father is consistently in a kid's life, especially for boys, right, their chances of succeeding in life are infinitely higher, right? And they did all the studies and all that, and a child growing up without a father consistently, right? Because when I say consistently means, not a father that shows up some days, yes, some days not, like shows up regularly, is part of the kid's life, and is not just there, sporadically. Those kids will succeed in school. They're likely to stay off drugs. They're likely to, to be better students. They're likely to be better partners later in life and things like that. So all those things are important. And I mean, I have to say that looking at, and again, and this is just as a test case, looking at my son, he turned out okay. And I'm not saying he didn't struggle with the divorce, but at the same time, he was able to, just because we had a regular relationship, even though it wasn't every day.
Right.
He knew I loved him. He knew that his mother loved him. He knew that my current wife loved him. He knew that he had a lot of love in his environment, and it wasn't like we were just seeing each other every couple of weeks.
Right.
So the Rabbanim that step into this have a big achrayus, right?
Yeah.
They have to really, if they're about to dispense advice that's going to change someone's life,
Right.
know what you're talking about. You have to really have some
Yeah,
background.
It's not so simple, yeah. Playing with people's lives.
100%. So, this story that you're telling me, again, there's a lot more to it, clearly. And I'm not faulting this Rav.
No.
I'm sure he did the best he could.
Yeah.
But it does show you how Rabbanim can have a major impact, especially in the Hamish community where they take their word so seriously. It's something that has to be really closely guarded. Just my insight.
Oh, yeah. It's unbelievable. But let me ask you a question. If someone is married to a narcissist or a real manipulator, a very toxic person, how should a person, go about it? So let's say if the person says, this is abuse and this is not going to be an easy fight. The person knows that this is not going to be easy. So how does a person like that deal with
I think the problem is that people who are going through I'm not so sure that people realize necessarily when they're dealing with a narcissist, right? Or the narcissistic behavior or the narcissistic tendencies. I don't think they automatically realize it right away. I think it's after years of living with someone, you start to kind of formulate. It's usually other people who are kind of cluing you in to what's going on. Because I think when you're in it, you don't really know, what you're experiencing.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the manipulation works so well that they make you doubt yourself.
Exactly.
And
they gaslight
this is a whole huge game. This is not a simple game. This is not so simple.
And these narcissists, generally, what's wild about them is that these are usually people who are very charming outwardly.
Unbelievable.
Right? And so when they come to their public persona is completely different than their private persona.
Correct.
And their manipulation in the games they play. So, I mean, look, I'm a big advocate that people should go and get therapy if necessary. And again, and we're all guilty. We're all kind of guilty of not, seeking help when we need to seek help.
Right.
And that's the hardest part for them.
But a narcissist will never go for help.
No.
They don't believe in help. You think you need help. You know what they say, the wrong people are always in therapy.
Well, so
the people who need to live with a narcissist, they're in therapy.
And so, but I'm talking to the people that are living with the narcissist.
Right.
They may need a counselor or a guidance,
an education,
education, so that they can understand what they're dealing with, because they may not recognize the symptoms. They may not understand who they're dealing with.
But how does it work out? How does it work out in court? So let's say if they hire a lawyer, you represent the other side, and there's no reasoning over.
By the time they get to court, it makes very little difference why the marriage fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
And the courts nowadays, I used to get calls, he's cheating on me, he's this, he's that. By the time you get to court, the judges don't really care what the backstory is.
Mm.
You know, they come there with the job of dissolving the marriage, and how we dissolve the marriage doesn't really take into account, you know, what happened. Now, there are, you know, there is more of a movement now where, you know, they call it coercive control,
Yeah.
things like that. There is a movement now to have that be a factor in a divorce proceeding, where if the court can, if you could bring evidence of coercive control where someone was emotionally abused, because physical abuse is something that's easy to
You
discern.
can see it.
You
Yeah.
can see it.
Yeah.
There's signs of it.
Yeah.
You could provide evidence of it, right?
This is something that is
Right.
happening in your bedroom that nobody knows.
Yeah, and there's almost never any way that you can adequately, and the courts are so overloaded, there's no way to adequately bring this to light that it even makes a difference. So people, the problem is that the legal system didn't really account for coercive control or manipulation. What you're talking about, all this kind of emotional abuse, there was no way to account for it. And I deal with this all the time. Clients coming to me saying, I spent years of emotional abuse, and I was told I was nothing. I was told I was worthless. I was told that that I could never be this. I was that. And it's years of building up. Their self-esteem is like over here. And they can't even get out of this cycle because they're so dependent on this narcissist.
Right.
And so the problem is that they just endure it, and eventually something comes to blows. And usually what will happen is it'll manifest itself in some sort of physical abuse that comes later on in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the, you know, the straw that you know, that breaks the camel's back. And then they'll wind up in court. But unfortunately, the legal system, if you're counting on the legal system to help you with that, the legal system is not going to help you with that. There's very little you could do. In a custody battle, if you want to do forensics and bring in like psychiatrists.
Right. So I was going to ask you, what is a psychiatric forensic evaluation? Which means the way I understand it is that sometimes these therapists or whatever, social workers who talk to these people, they want to get you to, they want to see if you're bashing the other person or stuff like that. So they're looking for things that you don't know that they're looking for. They just ask you certain questions, but really what they're looking for is something else, and they get a picture. I mean,
so forensics really only comes into play when you're dealing with a custody battle, right?
So they want to evaluate which parent is more sane or something like that?
Well, you want to make, okay, so there's a few factors. You know, generally the courts, they want to look to, when you're looking to determine who the party is or the parent is who's going to have custody, primary custody, you know, the courts are guided by this principle, which is called the best interest of the child, right? Who is going to provide for the best interest of the child? Usually who that is someone that is fostering a love, fostering the relationship. If one parent is bashing the other parent, one parent is constantly alienating the other parent. Alienation, what you were talking about in this case here, right? Where you have like, you know, this, allegedly this rabbi, you know, was alienating the kids from the father. What that basically is a slow process of feeding into the kid's mind that the kid's bad. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of divorces where, and this more often than not is the father that gets alienated, where the mother has a lot of influence over the children. And what she does is slowly but surely build up a campaign against the father. Now, you know, you could do so much if it's fake, but what she does is she builds up on little things, and you know, and gets the kids to
believe that
turn
because
against.
they want to believe the mother, right?
They want to believe the mother because there's a trust there that inherently kids have, and that you know, in their mothers, and when their mother speaks, and slowly but surely they can alienate it to the point where I have some kids where you can't even explain why they're not talking to the father, but refuse to talk to their father.
But what about, like you said before, if a father, his heart is there and his heart is in the right place and he wants to have a relationship with the kids, don't the kids feel that? I mean,
so that brings me to the second part, which is more often than not, if the father's a good guy, he really cares about his kids, and his kids see that. You know, there's no, you know, the actions speak louder than words, right? And at the end of the day, there's no amount of manipulation that the mom can go through. It will slowly, the kids are smarter than that. Kids are very perceptive, and they're very in tune with what's going on, and they could pick up, and they know when they feel one party is being slighted or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, you're right. But the problem is that, which brings you a whole other issue, is you could have situations where, and this is one of the biggest tactics that are used by attorneys, and there's some attorneys, I mean, I deal with this daily, right? The easiest thing you could do is if you, let's say, going through a divorce and some dirty attorney says, you know what, the best way is let's get him out of the house, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays, unfortunately, it's very easy to get someone through an order of protection. You get him out of the house.
Yeah.
As simple as mom says he threatened me. Done.
Right.
You know what happens
Right.
next? Thing you know, the police are there. He's being arrested.
Arrested, yeah.
Even if it's not true, by the time you get through the family court system to
Yeah.
get this adjudicated and to have a hearing on the issue of whether there was a threat, whatever it is, it's 3-4 months out. In that time, there's an order of protection that protects mom, protects the kids. Dad can't go near the kids. You know what? Kids don't see dad for 4 months, right?
That
And
doesn't help.
yeah, and no, that doesn't help. So now he's become the bad guy. Mom's
Yeah.
has 4 months to convince him. They don't get to see anything from dad. So oftentimes this
Wow.
this is
It is
piggyback.
horror story.
It is a hard, but this happens all the time. The easiest thing to
Also,
do.
they make these police reports, even before the dad knows even, or there's reports going in and nothing happens.
Yeah.
After
they
5,
build up a
6
case.
reports, you get an arrest. And like,
You
oh my
don't-
God,
you
there's
don't
4 reports over there.
You don't even need
This
5 or
is
6
this is
reports.
evils.
It is evil.
stuff.
And so when I talk about, one of the things that I talk about is oftentimes these get refusers, and I was saying, initially, like sometimes they may be justified in why they're upset, right?
Right.
And oftentimes what you're seeing is some of these guys that become get refusers, it starts out with an order of protection.
Wow.
They're essentially, disenfranchised from the house. They're restricted from the house. They can't get their stuff. They literally have to be they're exiled, right? And now this order of protection protects the mom, the kids, but the system is so slow that it takes forever. And by the time the damage is already done, they're already out of the house, and by that time they can't get, even if you go through the hearing and they dismiss this order of protection. You know what the problem is? The divorce has already started. He's been out of the house. At that point, you're not going to get back in the house.
Mm-hmm.
It's problematic. So, and then it also sets the tone for who's going to have custody, because now mom has the de facto custody. Now, I'm not saying this happens, by the way, with I've seen this happen with men too, but the vast majority of the times, it's a tool that attorneys will use for women, because the police are very likely to believe the women when they call and say, hey, this and this happened. If the guy called and said she threatened me, they would come, they try and work it out. The police are not going to make an arrest. It's not the same. So there is a bias when it comes to that towards the women, and unfortunately, it's a tool that's used in the Frum community, and it's very unfortunate because it's the easiest thing to get. You do not need to prove anything. You just say he threatened me.
Yeah.
I have one case I'm dealing with now. Again, this is not a Jewish couple. She threatened that he raised his hand to her, right? Like raised his hand. Didn't threat that he hit her, and she felt threatened, right?
That's all she needs to say.
Raise his hand. That's all she needs. Raise his hand to her like this, right? So, and we sit there, and we're 5 months out. The system's so slow that we haven't even had a hearing on it. Meanwhile, the guy had to find a new apartment, and the kid, he had to fight for custody. We finally got him access to the child. He has to bring the child over to his new apartment. But these types of things, this type of manipulation, right, can really set the tone for what the relationship is with the kids. So, when I talk about keeping in a healthy relationship, the healthy divorce, and obviously if people are suffering from mental illness, this is not a conversation that you're going to have. Different conversation.
Yeah.
But if you have two normal parents who want to go through a divorce, there are ways to do it to avoid all of this drama, because they think that they're winning. And sadly, I have to say, there's plenty of attorneys that you'll hire and they'll spend a lot of money on.
Yeah.
And they're going to make you feel good because they're fighting for you. But really what they're doing is they're turning your life into a nightmare.
Ruining your life and the kids.
They're ruining your kids' lives. They're ruining what they're doing is creating a circus, right?
Yeah.
And what you don't realize is, while you think they're fighting for you, what they're doing is they're muddying the waters. They're making it impossible for you to move on peacefully. But before you know it, you're out $100,000. You're depleting your resources on legal fees, and the next thing is that you lost. Both sides are fighting over the kids. The kids are getting the kids are suffering because of it. You're starting to see problems in school. You're starting to see behavior problems. Kids are getting suspended from school. I'm dealing with some parents right now where, like, the kids, because of what's going on in the divorce, school's kicking them out of because the kids are now their behavior has changed so dramatically that they're fighting every day. So it's a
nightmare.
It's a nightmare, but it's one thing leads to the next, and it's inevitable that if you go down that route, you're going to wind up with your family in shambles.
Yeah. Unbelievable stuff. And when is a order of protection justified?
If someone is legitimately threatened
abusing,
or
like
abused,
physically,
absolutely,
emotional. Can you get an order of protection for emotional abuse?
Unfortunately, not.
Not. So they
not yet, but that's changing. I think the laws are going to change within the next year or so, where that will become a criminal offense. Coercive control. It's hard to prove, but if you can establish coercive control, it will become more of a criminal in nature if you can establish that pattern. But
Wow.
right now, unfortunately, that type of
Yeah.
emotional behavior, unless there's anything physical associated with it.
And the same thing is, when should somebody fight for sole custody?
If you're, look, oftentimes in the relationship, together the parents are toxic, right?
Right.
It doesn't always mean that one-on-one, either parent is bad with the kids, right? So they may be a bad spouse, and you may feel they're a bad spouse, and they may feel you're a bad spouse, and all that.
But they're good parents.
But they're good parents, right?
Wow.
And
it's
again,
an interesting way to look at it,
Yeah.
because when two people are fighting, they're painting with one brush, with one stroke, the whole person,
and it's rarely the case where the relationship indicates the parenting. But every once in a while, you have some toxic parents where what they're doing with
or sexual abuse and crazy.
Okay, again,
I mean, we're not even talking about that.
If there's sexual abuse, physical abuse, absolutely sole custody. Okay, those are cases, but typically if there's sexual abuse and there's even an allegation of that, the parent that is being accused of sexual abuse is going to have supervised visitation. They're not even going to have like the access they're going to have is going to be very limited. It's going to have to be with someone there.
The sad part is that there's the shame that comes with this, and some people just don't have the courage to come out and stand up for this.
Are you talking about the shame that comes with sexual abuse?
Yeah.
Are you saying people that are victims of sexual abuse?
Either the victims or even the people are hiding this. This is brings such a shame to the family and everything. It's.
Unfortunately, I think that there are people out there that don't get the help they need because of the shame. I think that's what you're saying, right? And that they're not getting the help that they need, and that's true for all of us up until the modern times. People were ashamed to go get therapy. Right now,
that's true in the secular world as well.
Not anymore. I think it's been normalized, to the extent where getting therapy is so normal. There's apps for it. There's the celebrities are talking about it.
Right.
I think everyone to some extent needs therapy because we're all struggling with something. I know the show's called The Struggle, but we all, at the end of the day, right? All of us as humans, we struggle with something. Some of us struggle with finances. Some of us struggle with relationships. Some of us struggle with our kids. Some of us are struggling with just staying afloat in life, right? It's hard. Life is hard. And it's easy to forget that we're all struggling with something. So we all, need therapy to some extent.
We all need therapy. Everyone.
And therapy comes in many different forms. I think it could be just someone to talk to. Right. Sometimes, and men especially, I think men are the most closed. Men don't really talk to people, right? So, and you see that because sometimes I'll get people calling me and I'm just still handling the divorce, but they talk to me like I'm their psychiatrist.
Sure, as a lawyer, has to be a shtickle psychiatrist.
A little bit, yeah.
What, did they teach you this in school? I think they give you. They don't give. There's not a.
They should. There's a lot of things they should teach you in school.
Yeah, because you're meeting two new people. You have to figure this out quickly. What is going on?
So I think over the years you've kind of figured
you pick it up.
You have to, as a lawyer, you sometimes have to read between the lines and be more intuitive.
Right,
and so I do play the role of a therapist.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll tell people, look, you're paying a lot of money for me to spend on the phone. If you want to, I'm happy to listen. But oftentimes I'm giving them just like life advice. Like there are times, like we're talking about the prenups, where I said to someone, it doesn't happen very often, but I kind of crossed the boundary, and I'm like, look, I've been dealing with this negotiation, and I have to tell you, I don't very, very often do this, but I don't think you should marry this person. I'm seeing the red flags all over the place. What she's asking for is so beyond the pale, and the things she's asking for tell me everything I need to know about what she's going to be like as a spouse. I said, be careful with this.
You're opening up a can of worms here.
Yeah, but and they can either listen or not, but and they may hate me for it, but I felt like it's my responsibility to give them a warning.
You're conscious.
Right. I give a warning, but to your point, yes, everyone could benefit from therapy, and the people that need it most are usually afraid. I think men in general are more proud and therefore afraid to do it.
Right.
It doesn't have to be in the form of a therapist. I think what the Frum community needs to figure out is how to make it more available. How do you make it more available and normalize it in the Frum community?
Right.
So it becomes
stigma, to remove that
the
stigma.
stigma. You see, though, the influential people like the Rebbeim came and said, "Hey, I think this is a great idea for you." So if everybody in yeshiva was told, like, "Hey,
normalize it.
Try this out. Have someone to speak to, because there's things that you are afraid to tell your parents. There's things you're afraid to tell your friends.
A lot of times the parents don't even know the children. That's what they say. They
Because
say
children
that,
are closed,
yeah,
and they tell you
yeah,
what they want you to
yeah,
hear.
and they want to make their parents proud, and it's
Right.
like, yeah,
And it's hard. And same thing with adults. We don't
yeah,
we're afraid. We want to keep our persona, a certain way. And so it's it's
yeah,
a very human thing to just be guarded. You need someone that you can let loose with and put, let down your guard and really have an honest conversation about how you feel. And it's cathartic, right? To do
right,
that. And it doesn't happen very often.
right.
So
So talking about parents in the Frum community, what do you see as far as parents being involved in divorces of their children, positive and negative? Like, what is the parent's job to what role should they play when something breaks out?
it's a tough question because a lot of times the parents that are involved in the divorce are usually the ones that instigated the
That's
divorce.
what I'm trying to say. But they
uh,
mean well, but they
right.
love the
They,
kids.
they
It's very
right.
complicated. I mean, they do love the kids, but then you want to tell me it's an ego, and they literally are going to take home their children because of
Right.
they're fueling this fire. And on the other hand, what should a parent? They should sit side and decide and just say whatever you think is right, and I'm going to support. What is their
Well,
job?
so I mean, again, this is just my opinion,
Yeah.
but I do see there are some overbearing parents where that the parents are the reason for the divorce, and then they're somehow involved in the divorce.
These are parents who are toxic, like these are personality disordered parents.
You
These are
know,
controlling parents.
I don't think I have the qualifications to diagnose what these parents
Yeah.
are, but you definitely see the writing on the wall when you talk to some of where the parents are involved in every conversation. They don't give their kids any autonomy, which makes it hard
Even
for them
to
to navigate.
express themselves is
Yeah,
what you're saying. I mean, they're like running the show,
they're running the show.
200%.
They haven't cut the umbilical cord, and
Right,
therefore
right,
they're very right. And you can
right.
see why the marriage fell apart.
Mm.
So the parents can be toxic for a relationship. I think that the really good parents that are kind of in the healthy relationship are the ones that know their boundaries,
Uh-huh.
and they realize their kids are not married. They help them get set up. When the kids come to them for help, they
That's
make
when
themselves available.
support.
Exactly. But the ones that are constantly interjecting into their kids'
Right,
lives,
right.
The helicopter parents at
Yeah,
where the kids are in their
right,
40s and they're
right,
still,
right.
so that is a
But
problem.
that is a huge problem because
Listen, if parents see abuse, then absolutely step in. If you see abuse, because oftentimes it's hard.
also that's where the fine line is. There's a parent that sits home and sees their daughter or their son, something is not okay.
Right.
So they don't know when to say to themselves, 1 second, when am I stepping in? I don't like what I see. Or should I stay back and say, you know what? Let them do it on their own. They're adult enough. It's very complicated.
If it's physical abuse, I think.
Physical abuse is
right.
clearly
Emotional abuse, I think, again, my opinion, and I don't know if this is, I think what the parents should do is guide them and say, hey, listen, you should really speak to someone. I don't think they should be the ones to do it. They should they should guide them and get them into the right hands to someone who was outside. Because one of the problems is that automatically parents are very protective. So they oftentimes see things through a filtered lens.
Right.
And what may seem like abuse is not necessarily abuse. It's just the parents are seeing the relationship with their lens.
Right. That's very smart.
Right.
So what you're saying is that the parents should help them build their own self-esteem, and and they should get their own education and knowledge of how to navigate their own life.
Well, that I think starts before the marriage as well.
Yeah,
but I think the parents should guide.
It starts
them.
by the chusin lessons, But
probably, listen, I happens to be that the chusin lessons are
just halachas, right?
Yeah,
it's not about life.
It's almost like the most insignificant things are
before the marriage,
right? Everybody. We all got
your
married.
days. You were like going
There's
2
nothing.
weeks.
They gave you nothing.
A few days before the chazan. I mean, in the Hasidic world, is also. I mean, I don't know if it evolves, but I think that huge education is missing as far as what is marriage. I mean, what is your goal in life, and are you? There are givers, there are takers. Understand it. Zero knowledge. 2 kids getting married, and like, go knock yourself out.
Seminaries and yeshivas
are talking about everything, but
should have that conversation. Listen, I've always said this: the yeshiva should have that conversation.
Right.
They should have about personal finance.
Yeah.
That could come into a marriage not really knowing anything about. They should understand a little about personal finance.
Right.
And they should understand, because you come in with no tools. You're 21, 22 years old.
Don't know a thing.
Nothing, right? And you all, what we all do is we model it off the relationships we saw.
You may
not have seen the greatest relationships,
right?
So it's hard to know what it is that you're getting into when you get married, and you have to figure it out. And I think it's kind of unfair burden to put on a 21-year or 22-year-old.
Yeah, it's crazy. How about boundaries? When you have to put down boundaries, you want to put down firm boundaries with an ex-spouse. How do you navigate that
Oh,
part?
that's a tough question. I mean, listen, from personal experience, I mean, different people will say different things. You know, having gone through a divorce myself, like I probably didn't really understand where the boundaries were, what I should do.
Yeah,
Again, no one said to me, okay, you're divorced now. Here's what you should do. Here's what you should
you
do.
can do.
Do you go help out when your ex says, I need help doing this and this, and and it happens to be when you get remarried, you get a quick education about like where the boundaries are,
Yeah,
because your new spouse will tell you, hey, I don't
this
think
is
that's
unacceptable.
right. I don't think it's such a good idea that you should be offering to take out her trash, right? Like,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so, and you have to kind of find that middle ground. But there is such a thing as having a good relationship with your ex, especially if you're raising a child. I don't think that you should be in daily contact or like that. I think there should be some limits. I mean, I think the best thing that happened is when our son was old enough and I could kind of, just communicate with him directly, and there was less.
So there was less communication. Yeah.
Yeah, and not because not in a bad way, just because if you're remarried, neither spouse wants you still having regular, contact with the other spouse, and not in a bad way. Again,
Right.
it just there should be some sort of boundary there.
Right. And how do you manage clients' expectations? So let's say if a client says you're not doing a good job,
You,
I'm not happy with. Sometimes it happens. They're so
yeah,
upset and so nervous. They spend so much money, and they want to run the court system. And the attorney is like, "Listen, I can do this, I can do that, I can try," and they're like lashing out on the attorney.
you deal with this regularly, especially as a divorce attorney,
Yeah,
because you're dealing with, like I said, with people at their worst,
at their
right?
wits'
So,
end.
right at their wits' end, they're going through. There's a lot of emotional stress, a lot of
Right.
financial stress, but more than that, the problem is that their expectations about how justice works and how the court system works,
Yeah.
and the reality, right? Like, a client can call me and say, I really, this is unfair. I want X, Y, and Z. She or he is not honoring the agreement. We said, okay, in order for me to do that, I got to file a motion with the court, which is expensive, right?
Right.
Then you got to submit it to the court. You got to wait for the court to have a hearing on it, a decision. The process is long. The clients are like, why do I have to wait this long? Why is there no repercussions? Why is there? And I get that often. And unfortunately, the reality is the court system is not perfect. It's very slow, and results are very slow. So for divorce attorneys, the reason why a divorce takes several years is because the courts are so slow to move things along,
Right.
and getting results on anything takes forever. So clients get frustrated, and you're their guide, right? As their attorney, you're
Right.
basically their guide.
Right.
They look to you, and if you're not delivering, and what they end up doing is they say, okay, I'm going to go to the next attorney. Next attorney's going to have the same issue, right?
Right.
Except, what happens is oftentimes I've had clients, we call them red flag clients.
Right.
These are clients that have had 4 attorneys before they get to you.
Right. I've seen people change attorneys in the middle of the case.
It's because they think if they change something
things are going to change. Things are going to happen.
Nothing's changing. The
Mhm.
reality is, listen, sometimes if you have a bad attorney and he's not getting anything done, or he or she's not getting anything done, absolutely.
Which happens also.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I deal with a lot of ineffective attorneys. If they're not running a good practice and they just overwhelmed or whatever it is, and they can't get anything, that does happen.
How can a person know who to hire? You know what I mean? Like,
You're gonna get, most often it's gonna be
referrals?
referral based,
Right.
right? And you're gonna have someone that had a good experience with you, and whatever it is, and that's where most of my clients are coming from. Is like they've either had a good experience with someone in their circle has had a good experience with us, and they refer us. And not every case is gonna have the same outcome. And also sometimes clients have expectations that are just unrealistic, right?
Right.
They have all sorts of drug issues, and they think that they want sole custody, right? And they have all sorts of, like, they have a whole history of domestic abuse, things like that.
And
But
then get
in
upset.
their mind, they're the parent that should have sole custody, and realistically, it's not going to fly, right? And then also I have clients that they come to, the first thing they say to me is, how can I protect my assets, right? And the short answer is you can't, right? There's
Right.
nothing you can, if you don't have a prenup, you don't have anything ironed out beforehand, you're going to divide things up. But they think that there's something, what if I give all my money to my brother, or if I put my money in a trust? I'm like, they're not,
It's not realistic expectations.
right. These are not realistic expectations, and they can get upset at you for not achieving the result that they had in their mind, right?
Right.
So the reality is the court system is designed to be fair. And yes, it's not perfect. You're going to do your best as an attorney to achieve those results. And there are certain things that you can expect. If one spouse is not working and they have no income, you're going to file a motion for support, things like that right away. And you're going to get certain things. It may not be exactly what you want. And they may say, how am I supposed to live off this? But the reality is I'm limited by what the system will allow.
Right.
So, it is what it is. But if you're doing a decent job, most clients will see it. If you're really dropping the ball, the clients will see that too.
Right. What message do you have to people who are afraid that an avalanche of abuse is going to come down? They're really petrified from so many years, but they're contemplating divorce. How should they gather some courage and decide, you know what, enough is enough, and I'm ready to call this quits?
I think if you're dealing with that type of spouse where what you're describing as an avalanche and what basically is the backlash, you have to find your support group, wherever it is, whether it's your family, friends, whatever it is. And you have to really barricade yourself behind them, because what happens is they will start an all-out assault, text messaging, calling, harassing family members. I mean, you see that, and I see that with cases that I deal with where, dealing with one case right now where they're going through a divorce, and what the guy's doing, the kids are a little bit older, he's going on an email campaign to the kids, throwing the mother on the bus, saying, look what she's doing to me today.
Yeah.
It's an all-out assault, and it can get to the point where it wears you down, because you're getting family members sending messages here. We've had to go get orders of protection. We've had to go get like all sorts of things to protect this client, because this is a case where there's a real assault going on. Now, it's not a physical assault, but it's what you would call abuse, because what they're doing is systematically targeting everyone around you to try and pressure you to back down, right?
Right.
Because they're not happy with what you're doing.
They're putting fear into you, and this and that, and threatening.
So you have to really barricade yourself, and you have to have a good support system behind you. Otherwise, you're right, it's very easy to throw in the towel, because if you've been going through this your entire life, or for, I guess, the entire marriage, right, you're going to get the worst of it now.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
so
now is that.
Get out of the situation as well.
Have you had clients that in the middle of the divorce process would tell you, listen, I can't take this anymore, and they want to quit in the middle? I'm just like give in.
Absolutely. And I
You had
know
that?
they're going to be back. Yeah. Where what happened is, again, we're talking about narcissists, right?
Yeah.
Where what they did is the spouse, let's say, will realize that he's about to get hit pretty hard with the finances of this. And what he does is he manipulates the situation, starts sweet talking, because usually these guys are getting
They're very good at these things.
And I'm saying guys, but it could be women too.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
They're very charismatic, and they know how to like sweet. And there has been like a rinse repeat situation where they've gone through this ups and downs, where every time there was some blowout, and then they sweet talk their way back in, and these women typically will fall for it, because it's built into them to want to trust, right? And so they'll go back in the cycle. So in the divorce, it's no different. They can, if they realize they're about, let's say, for example, they're about to get hit with a $50,000 counsel fee award, right?
They right away change direction.
They're going to start sweet talking and start manipulating and all that to try and get the spouse to drop the divorce, which has happened. And you almost know that this is headed down the same path for a short while.
Of course.
But they succeeded for the moment, So yes, it does happen.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for people who have blended families? They have her kids, everybody's bringing in kids, and their own kids now. How do you navigate the best way possible that everybody, should be healthy and a solid family?
It's a hard question, because I've never experienced that blended family situation, right? And by blended family, but I've seen couples that have it.
Right.
I think what you need to do is, to be successful, is you kind of have to separate out the drama, because where the issue is where one couple went through a divorce, the other couple went through a divorce. If you're bringing in all you're seeing in the relationship is the drama that you're bringing in, then the relationship itself
is going to have an effect.
Right. And so the only real way is, if you're able to, and to keep this healthy, is to separate out that drama so that it doesn't kind of become part of the new relationship.
Right.
The ones that are successful in doing that, and again, not my department, you have to speak to a therapist about that.
Yeah,
but
the
ones that are
should
successful,
be, what you're saying is the focus should be the children more than
keeping, well, again, if they have children between them, but the successful ones are the ones that will keep the drama of their prior relationships out
outside.
of the marriage, because what kills these new marriages is the drama that comes with everything, because they're still dealing with fighting with their ex, and he's fighting with his ex, she's fighting with her ex, kids are going back and forth, and all they're seeing in their relationship is drama, and then they just like they wash their hands of it because it's just too much. So if you're successful in navigating that, you're a bit more successful in making the blended family work.
Right. So, in your practice, how many success stories do you see with people moving on with their lives and, second marriages, and they're a success story?
I mean, all the time.
You see that?
Yeah,
This
it,
is
it usually boils down to the people, right? If a person is a solid person to begin with, right?
right.
If a person's a solid person, grounded,
Because
has
you don't hear that much divorces the second time, correct? This is
you do. I mean,
most of you.
they
You
say
have a
that
bunch of
there's.
cases that
I
there
mean,
are
I've had
second
clients that I've divorced 3 times,
three
right?
times. Yeah.
Again, oftentimes someone that just jumps from one relationship into the next relationship
That is also
doesn't heal,
right.
right, is just really carrying the baggage into the new relationship, right? And so I'm speaking for myself, like
Right.
we're all the product of our history, right?
Right. Right.
Whether it's our childhood or our relationship prior to that. So if you haven't taken a moment to reflect and figure out what went wrong and like how you could become a better person,
Right.
and then you're bound to repeat that in the next relationship. So realistically, the only advice I could give is take the time to better yourself and figure out, whether it's through therapy or
Before you move on to
introspection,
the second
right?
one.
Figure out what it is that went wrong in that relationship and how you could improve things in the next relationship. And you probably don't want to jump too quickly from relationship to relationship. Some people haven't healed yet and they're already moved on to the next relationship. And that's usually
Not good advice.
no, especially if it's someone's been through a very long-term marriage, they just went through a divorce, and it's very easy because you're craving that love, right? And you're craving that relationship. It's very easy to find the first available person, but that's not necessarily always the best thing for you. You may need to heal first, even if it means being alone for a little bit longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any story that you remember in your practice, a horror story that shook you to the core, that just showed you a person who got lost in space? Like he took it to he took it to a level that you wouldn't believe that he can do.
Well, you know, I this is like more recent within the last year. I had a client. I had a client who was a young guy, relatively successful. Um, he was Jewish, Orthodox, not I don't more let's say more modex, as you would say,
Yeah.
but he was struggling with and he had a daughter, right? He was struggling with drugs, and his I handled his case for about 2 years, and during this time, like at one point, I had said to him, I'm like, listen, if you really want me to honestly get you to have more access, wife got an order of protection against him because he was heavily abusing drugs,
It was violent.
and yeah, and he was using for a while, and I said, look, I said, you need to genuinely take the time, stop what you're doing, forget the divorce right now, and go and get the help that you need, because there's no amount of lawyering that I could do that's going to get over the hurdle when they do a drug test on you and they see that you're, the substances that
Right.
you're abusing. So, and he did listen to me, or he pretended to listen to me, but he was really lying to me all along, right? And he was fooling us. He went to Mexico to some program, but really he was going to Mexico to do drugs, and
Right.
got somehow some certification from some fake program. And this was going on and on. He was just telling me, yeah, much better. But then literally, then I said, okay, let's get the drug test. He's like, yeah, and he would keep trying to blow me off, and he was sabotaging his case because we had to comply with certain orders, and he kept on sabotaging his own
Right.
case. And I said, look, and then he started turning, and this is part of it. And then he started turning it around that I failed him, that because of me, he didn't see his daughter. And it really just smacked of someone who just not in touch with reality,
Right.
not able to actually
Of course.
look in the mirror and say, hey, but he turned it into a whole campaign against me. And I really just started seeing, he started literally harassing me, sending me nasty emails, threatening me and all that stuff, claiming that I was trying. So I I got off that. I had to get off that case. But even after that, lying to me, saying he was coming in for court appearances and he took a flight, but just like the guy was a mess,
Out of control.
out of control. And he was a kid that was very successful. He was in his 20s, had like
Yeah, but
cash advance
drugs
company,
will do this to you.
drugs completely. But to the point where he was believing his own lies, and I wasn't able to help him. And I said, I can't help you until you're ready to help yourself. And he would drop off the map for months. Like I couldn't, and we kept on getting clobbered in court because every time we'd show up,
Wow.
he would show up on drugs. He would refuse to take the test. Right, the one time he took the test, came back with literally everything under the sun. There was photos of him all over Instagram, like drinking and partying and all that stuff. And he wasn't going to get to see his daughter. And I felt bad because I really wanted him. I said, just give me 1 month of being clean, and I will get you access to your daughter. Yeah, Daniel, I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to take care of it. And same rinse repeat. I didn't see any change in the behavior, but that's kind of like the worst case scenario. We have a client where really is not able to get themselves under control,
Right.
and you want to help them, but really they're their own worst enemy. And so, the same thing will, could be for drinking or could be for other issues.
Yeah, which is a conversation for
right.
itself.
It's very sad, and these are people who need help. So the struggle is real.
Yeah,
right?
the struggle is
real, and for a lot of people, it affects their life. And you could see how the spiral. You talk about someone that takes their life, right? Usually, it's a spiral of things that start crashing down in their life.
Right.
They could go through a divorce, they could lose their children, they could start losing the things that are most important in their
Right.
life, and then the next thing you know, they feel like they have nothing left to lose. So
Yeah.
and that brings them to their lowest point. So,
Yeah.
getting things in check early on, is really important. And the message that you have here really is important. Is get someone in your life that can help you through that. If you feel like your world is crashing down around you, get help before it's too late.
Before it's too late. Yeah. In a perfect world, as an attorney, would you want to see some changes in the legal system when it comes to divorce?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there could be mechanisms. It's too technical now to discuss here, but there could be mechanisms that put into play that allow for certain things to happen quicker. We talked about orders of protection. What I would like to see is there should be more vetting or a quicker turnaround on the hearings that take place, which legally you're entitled to, right?
Right.
Before someone's excluded from the residence, right? It's too easy. And again, the problem is, here's the real problem. The problem is that if someone comes in with an allegation, he threatened, he did this and this, if you're the judge, right? Do you want it on your conscience that some crazy guy came back and shot somebody because you didn't issue the order of protection?
So they look at everybody as when a judge
murderer.
Yeah, I mean that's how they look. They have to look like that, correct?
Because they want to save their own skin. The DA is the same way. Everyone wants to save their own skin, and it's easier. I'm using the wrong terminology.
Right.
Shoot first and ask questions later.
Right.
Issue the order of protection. And then we'll deal with it, right?
Deal with it,
because what's the worst that can happen? You could destroy this guy's life, but you know what? At least nobody got killed, right? So what I would like to see, especially in the family court arena, right? So there's two different courts, right? Often people get confused.
Right.
They say there's divorce court, right?
Right.
So there's no such thing as divorce
there's
court.
Family court.
There's Supreme Court and there's family court.
Right.
The divorce and the financial aspects, all that, and everything, including custody, can be dealt with Supreme Court. But if someone has an issue like a family offense, like if someone like orders of protection, if there's neglect proceedings, things like that. Let's say, I don't know, so let's say someone sees that, the kids in a family are being neglected, which happens a lot, right? Where they're being abused or whatever it is. You as a citizen can contact Child Protective Services, and they'll file a family offense proceeding, right? Neglect, and then that family has to show up at the court, and that's how you look at it. And Child Protective Services will do a report. They'll do an investigation of the family. I get asked that question too. Like I'm an aide in this house and I see some like really terrible stuff going on in this house. Should I report it? Things like that. And the answer is yes, you're saving kids. Like if you legitimately see things going on, report it. So family court is where people deal with all of these things. The family court system is not perfect at all and could use a lot of help. Oftentimes men get a bad rap in family court. It's designed kind of like, again, and I talk very much about this because the system is biased against men for these things. Just like, when it comes to, the Besdin system is biased against women,
Yeah.
right?
Just like the family court
The
is
family
biased
court, when
against
it
men.
comes to custody and family offense, it's biased. Men don't do very
Wow,
well.
that's
Right.
some
So
statement.
that could be that. Now, I will say what has transpired in the last, couple of years. For example, when I go to New York City, New York County, I'm in a case
Yeah.
there. The courts, for the most part, look to do fair custody, right? When you come in, there used to be this presumption that the mother's going to get primary
Yeah,
custody.
because he's working. Isn't that the reason?
Sometimes, but if a dad comes in and says, "Hey, I want to have my kids 50% of the time," in New York County, the courts by default will award that, right? Unless you could show that there's a real issue there. So, but that's a real change. But again, I'm asking you, don't you think that that's fair?
Yeah, I mean it's fair, but
Right.
I'm
So,
just
but if a
saying.
dad wants, and I'm not saying it's for everybody, but if a dad comes in and wants to have that relationship with the kids,
He can make it work. It doesn't matter. He has
he doesn't care. He can move
he
his
figured
job
it out
around.
with the finances. He wants to be part of this child's life 50%.
Why should the father just be the guy there just to provide the income? Why
Yeah,
should that be the relationship?
right,
I
right,
provide, I write checks out to schools
right,
and this and that. Why should that
right,
be? The
right.
father should have that right.
You should
So,
have that right.
so
Yeah,
that should be a standard, and that should be, that should be a standard across the board, which is not. It's not. We're not there yet.
yeah. Is there anything that can be done? I mean, we're trying to change the world over here, but is
Right.
there something it can be done, or this is just like set in stone? And
It all starts with the legislature, right? So
okay.
anything that you want to enact, any kind of initiative, you
Yeah.
have to do with like a grassroots movement, and you have to
Right,
get
right.
build up.
So that's a lot of energy and a lot
Takes
of
a lot of
work.
energy, but people do it. Listen, and to protect the agunot, right?
Right.
That was a movement years ago. There was no one to fight for them. Now you have Instagram influencers and all that
Right,
that are very active with this.
Right.
Some I have issues with some of them, but I'm just saying. But the
Okay.
idea is what they're doing is actually a very good thing.
Because
And
nobody really is standing up for these women.
there's no one standing up for
There's
them.
nobody standing up.
And it's-
Everybody's picking up their hands. I mean, is
Right.
there any other solution? I mean, prenup is prevention.
Right. It's
But
prevention.
what happens when someone is, coming from a community this is unheard of, and it's never going to happen? This is going back I don't know how many years. We talk about a prenup.
Right.
Prenup what?
Well,
So-
Rabbanim have to have the cojones
Right.
to stand up and say the problem you have is that even many Rabbanim that you and I know, when you
They
ask
wouldn't
them,
stand up.
they will not
That
stand
means
up and say
if
anything.
that gets refused, the davens in their shul,
Won't stand up.
they'll be like
They'll
he'll be
they'll
like
say to
he'll
me-
be the
they'll
Rashakul in
say to
the
me,
in
it's
the
like,
shul.
You don't really know all. You don't
Yeah,
really know
no,
the whole
the deed
story.
pass. He
You don't
shuts
know-
you up like that. That's
Exactly.
the end of it.
And I've been turned off by some Rabbanim who I thought were like
We're like solid people,
Right.
right?
I said, I'm saying, here's the whole story. I'm telling you, do you trust me? Here's the whole story,
Yeah,
right?
I know the
It's like,
story.
is there, and again, I get it. Sometimes the women are using the kids as a pawns and all
Right,
that.
right.
And I hear that it's still not warranted. I don't think either side should use unfair leverage. But either way, the Rabbanim should step up and really, and I will say, for example, here locally in Muncie, there's Rabbi Walmark. I don't know if you know him.
Yes.
Rabbi Walmark, stand-up guy. I was extremely impressed. Anytime there was an issue where we needed someone of a Rosh Hashiva stature to step into the arena,
He had the guts to do it.
he had the guts to stand up in a crowd full of people and say that Das Torah says this. But you know what? Good luck trying to find Rabbanim
Yeah.
that you and I know to
Right.
stand up and say something
Right.
and speak out against it.
Right.
They'll say it's complicated. It's this and that. It's a million reasons they're going to give, but
Yeah. But in the meantime, there's no solution.
You know what? Somehow in the Frum community, we find solutions for everything, right?
But there's
Right?
certain things
We
that
can sell chametz with
yeah.
the whole, with the heter iska.
Yeah.
We haven't found a solution to this.
For this,
yet.
we can't find
No.
a solution.
I mean, I will say I was dealing with another case recently where the woman wouldn't give the get, wouldn't accept the
Right.
get. Sorry,
Right. What's the story with that?
She thought that somehow she had some sort of leverage and that she's like, I'll take the get when I'm ready. Now I think she just wanted, again, it's control. All this is about control.
And
right?
money sometimes.
Money too, but if you feel like you don't have control, you're gonna grasp at the one thing you can control, whatever that is.
Right,
You
right.
could have the Wi-Fi password.
Correct.
If you want to use that that's
Yeah.
your leverage, right?
Right.
So for a lot of men, it's that, and this woman thought she could do it. Now, the guy that I'm representing, he's a stand-up guy, was taking care of her even throughout these divorce proceedings, did everything he had to do, took care of her, gave her plenty of support, wasn't fighting over anything. She just wanted everything, right? But he wanted to move on with his life, and she wouldn't accept that. So she wouldn't accept the get. He ended up doing one of these heter me'er
Oh,
rabbanim.
yeah?
Yeah, he did it. In the end, she ended up taking the get a year later, but but for the longest time, he wanted to just accept again. He said, you want to go to Beis, let's go to Beis. We came to Beis, and she's like, well, I'm not ready to deal with that. So it was games she was playing. And it's, again, this type of
It happens
control
on both sides of the aisle.
right. It's more often than not, it's men that are doing it, but it does happen with women.
Right. Danny, you seem to be a stand-up guy and a very good lawyer. A lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of good stuff that we heard today. I have one final question for you.
All right.
Who is your role model?
Oof. I have to say that in my life, I have, there are two people in my life that were role models to me for different things. So one was my father in my life, mostly because he showed me what it meant to be a man and a husband, right? Like at a young age, my mother went through cancer, and she passed away when she was in her 30s.
When you were young.
Yeah.
So he was your
he was a rock. He was a rock. When we didn't have any money, I never felt like that. He never made me feel like we were poor, and we were poor. And he was working 3 jobs, and he never there was never any inkling. And he taught me, about a father's role is to take care of the family.
Yeah. He was in the military also.
He was in the army. He did amazing things without getting into the whole Entebbe and the Kippur War. And I think what really solidified it for me is, when I lost my mother, that same month he lost his father, he lost his wife, he lost his brother, right? And to keep it all together, and then to raise 2 kids, by himself, cooking and going to work and doing all that. And so
amazing stuff.
Yeah. And so for me, that was like all I needed to see what a man was and what integrity meant. And then later on in life, like the guy gets up at the crack of dawn every day. He learns, he does everything he has to do, does stuck quietly, takes care of people. I mean, there's literally nothing he won't.
One serious guy.
He just, there's not, and he's not, and not, there's no fanfare. He's
not
love. He just he does everything he has to do. And he came from good stock where he saw this by his parents. So there's that. And then in terms of role model, I mentioned earlier in this conversation, my great aunt who, stepped in and kind of took the role of a mother. So she wasn't religious, but she gave me she taught me how to analyze life. She taught me how to, she taught me the concept that, you can't control what happens around you, but you can control yourself. You can control how you respond to things.
Wow.
And she was able to get me through a lot of the hardest points in my life. Wow. And she passed away this past year, but she, up until the day she died, she was a critical part of my life. Wow. And I looked to her for guidance. Anytime there was a juncture in my life where I needed someone to talk to. You talk about a struggle. When there was a struggle in my life, she was the first person I went to. So
amazing.
The communication between her and I, and even my brother, and anyone that she really touched was really instrumental in formulating who I am. And I'm not a perfect person. I have a lot of flaws, but she was able to kind of sit me down every time and say, okay, let's look at this. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out how we're going to get past this, right? And she taught me that, and that's, I think, something that's really important for everyone to kind of figure out how to get over hurdles.
Wow, so, she was a gift in your life.
She was a gift in my life. So those are my role models.
Right. So you have an important job, and it's like that sola. You know what they say? We hope we don't need you,
right?
But when we need you, you should be able to make people live better lives.
I don't know that my job is anything more important than everyone else's job.
It is. It's sometimes, when it comes to these things and you're taking people out of dire situations, you look at it as saving people's lives.
So everyone always makes a joke, in shul around, like, it's like if you're driving this car, you must have done a lot of divorce, right? The way I look at it is, I have to make a prenuptial. I have to do my thing. And if I could do it in a way where I've actually impacted someone's life to the better, if I've gotten them through a difficult situation, then I've done my job, right? I've gotten, and I tell people right at the bat, you're not gonna walk out of my office at the end of this doing somersaults, right? You're not, that's not gonna happen. There's no yippee-ki-yay, that doesn't happen. What my goal is, and I tell this at kind of the first meeting I have with clients, is to get you out of this as cost effectively, efficiently, and with as little drama as possible, because this should be a blip in your career. Divorce is, for most people, it's one of the most difficult things in their life to go through. So, if I can get you through this legal process and kind of with your head up high, and save you a little bit of money in the process, because I'm not going to be that attorney that's going to just drag this case. And again, unfortunately, it does happen, and I have no choice, right?
Yeah.
There are cases where I'm dealing with the other side that they will not settle a case, right?
Wow.
And unfortunately, it's just a reality. But if I can help them and I can get them past this quickly, effectively, and with their head up, with a little bit change in their pocket, then I've done my job.
Wow, kol hakavod.
Oh,
Thank you so much for coming.
thank you
I
for
really
having me, man.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
this is really
Yeah.
nice.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. There you go.